Here we will briefly examine the spinal nerves. The spinal nerves are the paired nerves that emerge from various regions of the spinal cord. In total, there are 31 pairs, 8 pairs from the cervical region, 12 pairs from the thoracic region, 5 pairs from the lumbar region, 5 pairs from the sacral region, and 1 coccygeal spinal nerve that emerges near the coccyx. All spinal nerves, regardless of where they emerge from the spinal cord, are mixed nerves, because they contain axons of sensory neurons as well as axons of motor neurons. Sensory input from sensory receptors is brought to the spinal cord, while motor output is sent from the spinal cord to muscles or glands located within the periphery. Small bundles of axons, called the roots, are the structures that make connections to and from the spinal cord. The dorsal root contains axons of sensory neurons, while the ventral root contains axons of motor neurons. Just before the roots emerge from the vertebral column, they are merged into a single structure that we refer to as the spinal nerve. The spinal nerve will then branch into 2 structures called the rami, or singular ramus. The dorsal ramus is the branch of the spinal nerve that serves the dorsal or posterior side of the body, while the ventral ramus is the branch of the spinal nerve that serves the ventral or anterior side of the body. The ventral ramus is typically longer than the dorsal ramus because it has to reach further from the spinal cord than the dorsal ramus does. So this is a more complete diagram that shows the extent of the ventral ramus, which are the branches of the spinal nerves that serve the ventral or anterior side of the body. The dorsal ramus, on the other hand, typically serves structures that are on the dorsal side of the body, and therefore it has a shorter branch. To add to the complexity of the spinal nerves, the ventral rami form very large interconnected clusters at various places along the length of the spinal cord that are called the spinal nerve plexuses. The spinal nerve plexuses are only formed from the ventral rami, not from the dorsal rami. These plexuses are nerve clusters that we see will merge and branch repeatedly, and there are 5 major plexuses. From superior to inferior, they are the cervical plexus, the brachial plexus, the lumbar plexus, the sacral plexus, as well as the coccygeal plexus. So recall that the ventral rami are branches of the spinal nerves, and therefore they are mixed nerves, carrying both sensory and motor information. So here we'll briefly review the cervical through the sacral plexuses. The cervical plexus is formed from the ventral branches of spinal nerves cervical 1 through cervical 4. Its sensory functions include sensations from the skin of the posterior head, neck, and shoulder, while its motor functions control muscles that move the head and the neck. One significant nerve of the cervical plexus is the phrenic nerve. It is a long nerve that controls the dome-shaped diaphragm muscle, which is situated between the thoracic and abdominal cavities. When the diaphragm muscle contracts, it draws air into our lungs during inhalation. This nerve is one reason why a broken neck is particularly dangerous, because if this nerve is damaged, it affects our ability to control the diaphragm, and we are unable to draw air into our lungs. The brachial plexus is arguably the most complex of the spinal nerve plexuses, and we see that it is formed from the ventral rami of spinal nerves cervical 5 through thoracic 1. Its sensory functions include sensations from the skin of the shoulders and the upper limbs, while its motor functions include controlling muscles of the shoulders and the upper limbs. The lumbar plexus is formed from the ventral rami of spinal nerves lumbar 1 through lumbar 4. Its sensory functions include sensations from the skin of the buttocks, the genitalia, as well as the lower limb, while the muscles that it controls are the muscles of the abdomen and the thigh. The sacral plexus is formed from the ventral rami of spinal nerves lumbar 4 through sacral 4. In general, it does have some overlap with the lumbar plexus. Its sensory functions include sensations from the skin of the buttocks, the genitalia, and the lower limb, while its motor functions include controlling skeletal muscles of the buttocks and the lower limb. The sciatic nerve is an important nerve that belongs to the sacral plexus. It is one of the longest nerves in our body. It carries sensory input from the skin of the leg and the foot, and its motor functions control various muscles of the thigh and the lower limbs, namely the hamstrings muscle group as well as the tibialis anterior muscle.